Session 1, Part 1 of comms. Hopefully we're going to knock this all out in one session. Okay, I'm going to start by looking at the structure of building services and some useful organisations. What I want you guys to be able to achieve by the end of this part of the session would be to be able to state the name and purpose of at least 3 organisations that plumbers should be aware of. Describe the differences in responsibility between level 2 and level 3 qualified plumbers, and also apprentices would be useful too. And explain who might be able to bring to conclusion employment disputes. So in this PowerPoint, we're going to look at the structure of the construction industry, particular attention being paid to building services, which is what plumbing is considered part of. And we'll look at the process, briefly look at the process to become a plumber, and the organisations and government departments it would be useful for us to be aware of. So, building services is essentially split into 2 parts. It's split into mechanical services and electrotechnical services or industry. The mechanical services would include plumbing, heating and vent, refrigeration and air conditioning, and the electrotechnical is the electricians, really, electricians, security systems, specialist telecommunication, etc. In our test, it will probably just talk about plumbing, heating and vent, refrigeration, air conditioning and electrical. So they're the sort of 5 key ones to remember, really. Okay. So when it comes to getting qualified, all qualifications in the building services would be covered by Summit Skills. Summit Skills is the sector skills council for building services. And basically they set the criteria for the qualification. And then we have awarding bodies like City and Guilds, like EEL, like there's others as well, who would then build a qualification around the criteria that Summit Skills have set out. I'm just telling you this because it comes up in the test potentially. Okay, so at the moment you're studying a level 2 technical certificate in plumbing. Okay, this does not mean that you're going to be a fully qualified plumber at the end of it. You'd need to then do an NVQ on top of that qualification to then be considered a qualified plumber. Okay. So the minimum qualification to be a plumber is an NVQ level 2. To change your technical certificate to an NVQ, you'd need to do an apprenticeship and sort of be observed working safely in the workplace doing various tasks. As an apprentice, you should be working under supervision at all times. When you're qualified, you could work independently, but you should also be, if you're qualified to level 2 NVQ, you should still be partly supervised. You should have a supervisor on site that you can go and speak to and bring any issues to. Okay, only when you become qualified to NVQ level 3 would you be considered competent to take charge of your own site and then become the supervisor. A level 3 course is gas. Gas is a level 3 course, and you must do a gas course and register yourself with the Gas Safe Register with the appropriate qualification before you work on any gas appliances. And there's different, it's not just one sort of gas course and you're qualified to work on all gas appliances. There's specific courses for different appliances. Different sort of categories of appliances, to be more precise, like boilers or gas fires or cookers. Okay. Gas Safe replaced Corgi in 2009. And it's the official list of gas engineers who are qualified to work legally on gas appliances. There's also a water safe. This isn't something that you have to do, But if you get qualified, if you do a water regs course, water regulations course, you would be considered as a water safe approved contractor. It's not something that you have to do to work with water, but it does allow you to self-certify your work if you do work which is notifiable, and yeah, I mean, that's kind of useful. It means that you don't have to have an inspector come out to check your work. You would still need to let the water undertaker know before you carry out the work, and it's only certain works that's notifiable. It's works that's considered potentially sort of dangerous to the supply, things like fitting an ascending spray bidet or a pump that's going to pump more than 12 litres a minute. Approved contractor schemes, yeah. If you get your water regs qualification, you can join an approved contractor scheme, and these are run by various organisations. You get approved contractor schemes, which are run by the Association of Plumbing and Heating Contractors, which are trade association for plumbing, and also by the Chartered Institute of Plumbing and Heating Engineers, another trade association for plumbing. Okay, and they all have the same entry requirements. You need to be qualified as a plumber with an NVQ. You also need a water regulations qualification and an appropriate level of insurance cover. Okay. Trade associations, very quick. Chartered Institute of Plumbing and Heating Engineers, and the APHC, the Association of Plumbing and Heating Contractors, are both trade associations. Okay. As well as running the approved contractor schemes, they also try to ensure standardisation within the industry, people working all to the same standard, and will offer training and advice to members. I mean, for example, if you are having issues with some heating system you're installing, you could phone up the APHC if you're a member and sort of ask them for advice. Water undertakers also run approved contractor schemes. Water undertakers, also known as water authorities, are the people who are responsible for water management. For example, Thames Water, the people who deliver the water and remove the wastewater as well. These are what we known as the water authorities, or water undertakers. There's 10 of them, and you don't really need to know a great deal about it, but you can find more information if you wish by going into ofwat.gov. DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They're essentially responsible for the delivery and removal of water from the government's point of view. Okay, and they're the people who put in place the RAS, essentially, Water Regulations Advisory Scheme, who sort of help in writing the water regulations. They also created Ofwat to regulate the water undertakers. So we'll look briefly at RAS. RAS, their job is they're kind of like the water police, essentially. They'd inspect notifiable work, check there isn't a risk of contamination, which if you become an approved contractor, they wouldn't need to come and inspect it. You can self-certify. It's one of the benefits of being an approved contractor. They also look at new plumbing products, to approve them and make sure they meet the requirements of the water regulations. And every single product that you use on a hot or cold water system should be approved by RAS. Because heating systems are separate from the mains, generally speaking, they wouldn't need to use RAS certified fittings. Okay. The Department of the Communities and Local Government, these guys are more responsible in terms of the building regulations. So DEFRA, or water regs, DCLG are more involved in the building regs from the Department of Communities and Local Government. Building regs are split into 14 parts. There's only a few parts that we really need to be aware of. Part A, which is to do with structure. Part G is worth being a bit aware of. It talks about water efficiency, hygiene. Part H is about drainage and waste disposal. Part P is pretty essential as well. It's all about environmental technologies, essentially. Sorry, Part L is environmental technologies. Part P is electrical safety. Okay, which is also worth being aware of. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of useful information in those that will help us do our job as plumbers. Okay. Yeah, with the water regs, it's a criminal offence not to follow the building regulations. So we have to follow the water regulations. We have to follow the building regulations. They are law. Okay, and they actually send out inspectors that are going to be employed by the local authority. And some people call them building control officers, to come out and to check that people are doing the job correctly. Essentially, before you start any big jobs, you'd have to get planning permission, and that planning permission would be given by the local authority. There'd be building control officers who'd look at the plans and check that they meet the requirements of the building regulations, and then they'd come out again to site at various times during the building process to check that the job's being done the way that it should be done, essentially in line with our building regulations. Okay. Useful thing to know about as well is the BSI. Okay, British Standards Institute, and the BSI write the British standards. Okay. The British standards cover loads of different things. Like there's literally British standard. If you can think of it, if you can imagine it, there's probably a British standard for it. But they specifically for plumbing, they'll sort of create British standards for fittings. They'll create British standards for valves, and also sort of for installation practices as well. You know, BAC in 806 describes sort of the correct way to carry out sort of the installation of hot and cold water systems, essentially, including sort of things like how to test it and stuff like that. You know, it's useful thing to read. So some of the key standards that are worth noting is BAC in 442, which covers the manufacture of radiators. That might come up in your heating exam. BAC in 806. Installation and testing of hot and cold water systems. That will come up in your cold and your hot exam. 8558 again could come up in cold and hot. It's further information on installation and testing of hot and cold water systems. 7671 covers electrical systems and installation, which will come up in your electrical exam. And BAC in 12056 covers design, installation and maintenance of above and below ground drainage systems. So that will come up in your drainage exam. Okay. Finally, BS 8000. This might crop up in a couple of different exams. It's all to do with workmanship on the building site. Okay. So briefly look at employment disputes now. Okay. Occasionally there might be a disagreement between a plumber or any employee and their employer. Ideally, that should be resolved informally. That's the best way to deal with things, is to sit down and talk and discuss. But if you can't reach an agreement, then you have to contact it. It would be most beneficial to you to contact an outside organisation. If you're a member of the trade union, probably the first step would be to go to the trade union, speak to them and sort of get help. The main union for plumbers is Unite. But if you're not a member of a union, you could contact ACAS. Okay, ACAS stands for the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, and they will actually sort of give impartial support to both the individual and the company. They'll give advice. I mean, they do exactly what it says in their name. They give advice. They try to conciliate, which is like sort of bring people together and talk and reach an agreement. But they'll also arbitrate, which means that arbitration is essentially giving a judgment, I suppose, a non-legally binding judgment on a situation, which normally would mean that you can come to an agreement or an enforced agreement even outside of the courts. People can choose to ignore the arbiter's advice, but generally speaking, if it goes to court, they would lose, essentially. Right, now it's time for your tasks.